Honourable Member for Courtenay-Alberni.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise today on this concurrence motion and to talk about really the hardest hit sector, Mr. Speaker, in our country since COVID-19 came upon us. And before I get started, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the federal NDP and as the critic for small business and tourism, I want to acknowledge a huge loss, and I believe that you'll join me and all parliamentarians, and that we lost a wonderful leader in the tourism sector, Charlotte Bell, who was the CEO of Tourism Industry Association Canada, and she was just an incredible champion for tourism businesses and the tourism sector right across our country, and helped grow this magnificent sector. And we just lost Charlotte recently. And I want to send our condolences to her family and of course to the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, their team, and all of her members. We won't forget you, Charlotte. You're an incredible asset. Thank you for all of your contributions. Mr. Speaker, we are hearing stories in every riding, all 338 ridings across our country. Given that we have the longest coastline in the world with 3 coasts, incredible mountains, and the scenery right across our country from coast to coast is magnificent. And every community has been impacted by COVID-19 and the tourism and hospitality sector, which was a $103 billion sector prior to COVID-19 arriving in our communities and around the globe. In fact, we've lost 521,000 jobs in the tourism and hospitality industry since this pandemic has hit us. And it is the hardest sector, and it'll be the last sector likely to recover, Madam Speaker. I see you've taken the chair. And it's absolutely just been a huge impact on those tourism sector businesses. I come from, a tourism-based community in Tofino on the west coast of Vancouver Island, so I know all too well the significant importance tourism has, not just to the local economy, but also to our culture and to our infrastructure. We've had great infrastructure in place that we've benefited from, and many people in our communities benefit from. Go way and well above the tourism sector, including bus transportation, for example, Madam Speaker, that we benefited from. So without the tourism sector, all of the infrastructure is going to be difficult to manage. And I'm going to talk about the threat to that infrastructure in a moment. But Madam Speaker, I do want to talk about the impact this has had, particularly on those tourism operators from coast to coast to coast, and in those in the hospitality industry, where they've had to close their doors not just once, many of them twice, 3 times, Madam Speaker. And to weather that, they've had to go through the myriad of programs. And as we've seen, the government continues to design programs that are hard to access. And, we need the government to continue to work with opposition members like the New Democrats, who've brought forward changes where we put pressure on the government, for example, to change the wage subsidy that initially they were going to roll out was going to be 10% to 75%. But we need them to go further for those businesses, Madam Speaker, and listen to the tourism and hospitality sector. We also brought forward the idea of a commercial rent program. Of course, they initially rolled it out that it was going to be landlord driven and made it very difficult for many businesses to qualify, Madam Speaker. As they couldn't meet the measurements or the various different criteria that they set out. We were glad to see them fix it in the fall, but we were extremely disappointed that they didn't bring that back, the eligibility, to April, when they realized that they had flawed in their design of that program. They admitted it, Madam Speaker, yet they still refused to go back to April 1st, expecting that those businesses that are in the hardest hit sector are going to be able to survive and not get the help that maybe their neighbor got because their landlord would apply and they didn't have a landlord that was willing to or couldn't, Madam Speaker, for whatever reason. So now we're glad to see it be fixed, but we would like to see them go back and bring that back to April 1st in fairness to their neighbors and their competition, and to help them get through it. They closed their doors. Many of them closed their doors to protect public health from the middle of March on. These are the unsung heroes, the small businesses and tourism operators in our country, Madam Speaker. We don't talk enough about them and their employees. And this is a sector that is going to need significant investments and a lot longer than other sectors because they are the hardest hit sector. Clearly, we helped support the government to fix their CEBA loan program, but that loan program only goes so far, Madam Speaker, and there's still people that aren't able to access any of these programs. Startups, for example, we brought forward solutions to the government where they can use measurements from March moving forward. They can look at receipts like they did finally with the CEBA loan program as a measurement to be able to dole out funds to legitimate businesses and have measurements in place so they could support them. But they haven't done that. Startups are being left out. A startup in my colleagues riding from Cowichan, Malahat, Langford, he has been bringing this to the attention of government repeatedly about a veterans brewery, Vita V Brewing Company. This is some veterans that put their lives on the line, went out, started a social enterprise, Madam Speaker, to help veterans suffering from PTSD. And they opened in the beginning of March, and they have not been able to access any supports, Madam Speaker. Not the wage subsidy, not the rent program, not the CEBA loan. They have been completely left out high and dry. And you think the government would look and say, well, they paid employees since last March. They closed their doors to protect public health, that they would come to the rescue and help these incredible heroes. No, they've left them high and dry. Just like my colleague in Victoria with, a restaurant there that she's been constantly bringing to the attention of government, like businesses in my riding, that have been forgotten in Courtenay. We've seen the lack of supports for really small micro businesses like fish guides, who, the programs that they've rolled out, well, the wage subsidy doesn't work for them because they're self-employed, they're sole proprietors. They don't need the rent program. And the CEBA loan, well, most of them don't qualify because of the requirements that are in place. And they need help. We were glad to see the government extend CERB for those that have been impacted. We were very glad to see that, Madam Speaker. But they need to create different programs for different markets, especially in the tourism and hospitality sector that have been left out. And we want to make sure that we're helping those. Right now we've got a wild salmon crisis in British Columbia. There are plenty of opportunities to help support the tourism sector, but also to invest in restoration and enhancement to help support sectors like the aquaculture industry that is having to diversify and build more resiliency. We are not seeing the support that we need right now, Madam Speaker, in areas that have both industry and tourism that need help. We know that businesses like, for example, in Port-Alberni, where I live, that were left out because their city releases them spaces for their restaurants or their retail outlets and their different businesses, and they were left out because they lease from a small local government. Well, that's not acceptable. Why would they be left out because of that, Madam Speaker? They're paying rent. They're trying to keep their businesses going. They have employees that have families that they need to feed. And the government hasn't supported them until, late in the fall. And then they said, okay, but we're not going to go back till the beginning of the spring like everybody else. Madam Speaker, I do want to talk about the solutions in a moment here, because the Tourism Industry Association of Canada has done an incredible job bringing forward a recovery plan, as has the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada and many of the travel and transport sectors that we rely on, that we benefit from. Tourism relies heavily, obviously, all Canadians benefit from our air and aviation sector and from our bus sector. And, we just had a bus line right now in my riding on Vancouver Island, and me and my colleagues from the NDP on Vancouver Island wrote a letter to the new Minister of Transport urging him to do something to save Wilson bus lines. Because, Madam Speaker, if we lose Wilson bus lines, this is the absolute critical infrastructure for people, especially the most marginalized on Vancouver Island, that relies on tourism for the bulk of the income to keep that business afloat, that many people in our ridings benefit from. And I think about people who live in remote First Nations like the Heshquit or the Hauset or Ukluthat, or the Huet. All of these Nuu-chah-nulth nations, I can speak to all of them in my riding that benefit from the tourism infrastructure that's in place, like the bus services, to get to doctor's appointments, to be able to connect with their family members. Many of them struggling, and to get to a doctor, they rely on bus transportation, especially our elders. Some of them can't drive. They might have vision issues or health issues, and they can't get to an appointment. People that have barriers, people living with disabilities that absolutely require the support and the service. Now, what the government's saying is go out and borrow more money. We're going to collapse the sector. People aren't going to come. Go borrow more money. Well, they're not able to do that anymore, Madam Speaker. They can only borrow so much. They actually need the government to step up to the plate. They keep talking about supporting the transportation sector. They haven't done that. And I want to thank my colleague from Skeena Bulkley Valley, because he has just been an incredible champion. Up in the Highway of Tears, he's talked about the impact of losing Greyhound, as many communities have in northern Saskatchewan. My former colleague, had raised this issue as well. Georgina Jolibois. And, this is absolutely critical that we create an essential bus network. And there is now a coast-to-coast bus coalition. They're advocating for the federal government to ensure that we have that connection right across our country. We have downloaded, Madam Speaker, this to provincial governments, and it's now become piecemeal, and it's unacceptable, especially for the most marginalized, Madam Speaker. We need to connect Canadians coast to coast, and we need to make sure that they get the support they need. Now, the 2021 Tourism Recovery Plan that I talked about from the Tourism Industry Association of Canada is absolutely fabulous, and it's very clear and straightforward, and they've identified their needs. They need the government to actually respond with supports, and we now know that HASCAP's out the door, but we want to make sure that financial institutions are actually ready to receive HASCAP applications and move quickly. They need to be able to be available on a per property basis, and my colleague from Rosemont, Petite Patrie, he has been hounding me because he has said that many businesses in his riding are not eligible because they have multiple locations and they're not getting the support they need. The government needs to change the flexibility of all their programs so that, people with multiple businesses that are at arm's length can actually get the support they need. They shouldn't be penalized, Madam Speaker. It's going to cost jobs and livelihoods, and it's going to impact families. Otherwise, the RIF funding has been absolutely a disaster. Only 14% of those that are eligible, those that have applied, have gotten it. It's just been a terrible rollout so far. The wage subsidy needs to absolutely be accessible 90% for those businesses until we're back to normal, Madam Speaker. And the wage subsidy as well, it needs to also be backdated, and they need to use the measurement, obviously, of 2019. But also, I know businesses that were caught in the middle. There was a business in Tofino, for example, where they closed their resort in 2019 to do some renovations and some work. Well, they're out of luck. And when you close your doors and you need help and you can't get these really important funding needs, well, I can tell you the CEBA loan will get you through a day, if you've got a resort in Tofino, if you're lucky. So this is critical that they start to work and amend these changes and support these folks that are there. And again, back to the aviation sector and transportation sector, we need a plan. We need the government to ensure that they're providing also some relief to NAVCAN and the Canada Air Transport Security Authority to get those services going and make sure that they're funding them. And again, I talked about the Indigenous Tourism Association sector. I got a frantic call from the CEO who was told that his budget had been trimmed from $3 million a year. Now, they have been absolutely essential to growing the Indigenous tourism sector, which is the fastest growing sector in Canada, Madam Speaker. And they provided critical supports, getting loans out the door to over 800 Indigenous businesses whom they know, who they have a personal connection with. And this is also the most fragile business demographic in our country. And they were told they were going to get cut from $3 million to $500,000, Madam Speaker. This is already after all of the work that they've done. And I hope that in the budget that the government's going to recognize the importance that they play and are going to play in the recovery, Madam Speaker. We've seen how the government has failed Indigenous businesses when it comes to the wage subsidy, for example. A lot of Indigenous-led businesses were ineligible at the beginning, and we went to the wall to get the government to fix that eligibility for those businesses that were ineligible because of the design of their business. Again, we need the government to be flexible. And I talked about some of the important pieces. Obviously, testing is critical to the tourism sector, Madam Speaker. We need the government to invest in rapid testing and look at other countries around the world where, we've seen success in terms of rapid testing. And, we need to also look at incentives. We saw the Harper government get rid of, a really important GST rebate that we gave to visitors, because we are the only country in the world, Madam Speaker, industrialized country, that charges a tax on an export sector like tourism. And so it's absolutely critical that we look at this. But I also want to talk about some really important sectors like the event sector that hasn't been getting the support that they need. And it's absolutely critical that we look at ways to support them, Madam Speaker, and get creative, because a lot of these people are working in that sector aren't going to be able to be employed till next year. And the other thing is that, Madam Speaker, when it comes to the NDP and our approach to the tourism and small business sector, there's some critical needs that were in play before the sector hit this turmoil. And we knew that businesses couldn't grow without affordable housing, Madam Speaker. You go to any resort municipality in British Columbia or any tourism-based economy in Canada, and they will tell you their biggest challenge is finding employees, and the reason they can't find them is because of housing. And we have an opportunity not just to recover and build back better when we hear that from the government, but build back better so that our sector grows, not just bring it back to where we were, but continue to grow. So that's something that the NDP wants to see. We want to see more non-market housing. We've seen our housing stock go in the 70s and 80s from 10% non-market to 3% today. Where in Europe, they're at 30%, Madam Speaker. That's absolutely critical that we have that piece of infrastructure. Childcare, absolutely critical. The Comox Valley Chamber of Commerce says it's their number one need right now is affordable, universal, and accessible childcare. Absolutely critical to the tourism sector. And that's why it's so critical to the NDP that we invest in these important infrastructure pieces. A dental and pharmacare plan, because we hear about insurance costs skyrocketing, Madam Speaker, for residential, for commercial, but also for dental and medicine. And Madam Speaker, small business people, especially in the tourism and hospitality industry, they're so close to their staff. They care about them, and they know that if they don't get those investments, they're more likely to miss work. They're more likely to, potentially not even be presentable to the public if they're missing teeth, Madam Speaker, and grow their occupation. So it's absolutely critical, for us to invest in our employees, and that's what small business and tourism sector wants. And of course, they want the protection of the environment, and they want to see us grow back and build back better. And again, I want to revert back to being that I am in coastal British Columbia. That we need to make sure we save our wild salmon, Madam Speaker, and you've heard me speak repeatedly in the House of Commons about that. And these are critical supports, Madam Speaker. We need investments in our ecology and habitat protection and restoration. This is absolutely going to be critical to the recovery of British Columbia when it comes to the tourism sector. And as we know, it is an absolutely critical sector. In the $105 billion sector nationally that tourism is in our country, BC has a huge share of the pie. And salmon is absolutely our cornerstone, not just of our tourism sector, but of course our food security, our economy, and our culture. And Madam Speaker, there is other things, that I could talk about. I could talk way more than 20 minutes about the tourism industry and how critical it is that we support them. But we also see the big banks not playing the fair game. We saw Dan Kelly and the Canadian Federation of Independent Business just over the weekend talking about merchant fees. The interchange fees are still way too high, especially for online business. So we've got all these businesses that have pivoted, that are moving online, and they're paying these absolutely outrageous rates, Madam Speaker. They need to be capped, and we need to be more in line with Europe. Right now in Europe, merchant fees are 0.5%. Here in Canada, it's a voluntary 1.4%. That's not good enough. You know, we saw the Liberals bring forward a private member's bill in the last Parliament. For 4 years, that bill got moved. I think it was 16 times, Madam Speaker. Clearly, they got the backs of the big banks and the credit card companies. They didn't want to debate it. So we need to cap merchant fees and be in line with Europe and Australia. I want to thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank everybody in the tourism industry. We need to make sure they're a priority. They are the hardest hit sector. Thank you.